Good morning, afternoon, or evening. My name is Jim Rothrock, and I'm the Commissioner at the Virginia Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services in Richmond, Virginia. I've been asked by VCU RRTC to come to you today and give you maybe some insights on how a person with a physical disability might be able to best benefit from the vocational rehabilitation program around the United States. The department that I work in is the designated state unit for vocational rehabilitation. We have about $60 million in federal funds and another 15 or so in state funds. We employ more than 200 counselors around the Commonwealth of Virginia in almost 40 offices. We have assistive technology and rehabilitation engineering and facilities around the state, I believe 4 of those. We have a comprehensive rehabilitation center that I'll be referencing later on. Wilson Workforce and Rehabilitation Center, used to be referred to as Woodrow Wilson Rehabilitation Center and abbreviated WWRC, and an array of other services that a person with a physical disability might be able to benefit from. I look forward to chatting with you over the next 30, 40 minutes. If I get too involved in ancient history, please take a nap and have your neighbor next to you poke you if it gets to something that might be of more interest to you. But I do think it's relevant and helpful to see the whole specter of how vocational rehabilitation has grown and gotten to where it is in 2017, such that an individual with a physical disability might better understand how to benefit from these services. I know just a smidgen about how a person with a physical disability can benefit from vocational rehabilitation, and that I am a person with a physical disability that has benefited from vocational rehabilitation services. In my youth, I was in a sledding accident in 1965 and hit a moving car with my shoulder, bringing a significant amount of pressure on my spinal cord at this level right here, and popped my spinal cord, becoming paralyzed and having some other disabilities along with that. And at that time, it was vastly different, because in the world of vocational rehabilitation, a person with a physical disability was readily referred to an agency like the one that I work at today, which is different than it is now. Voc Rehab started in the 20s, I believe, with the Smith-Fess Act. There's no quiz, so you aren't going to be checked on whether you can remember that or not, and evolved predominantly dealing with disabled individuals and then veterans to a very large extent. But it grew and grew and grew, and did a great deal of work with people with physical disabilities, because in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, our nation did not have a vibrant healthcare system full of insurances, and many times if a worker ran into some type of disability, their default referral was to vocational rehabilitation. And our program at that time was very, very good at being able to pay for a wide array of medical procedures. And we were incredibly successful at that time. I remember looking at some reports from the late 60s, early 70s, where the state of Virginia would routinely have 10,000 successes. And now we are having 4,000 successes a year, but the realm of what we accomplish is far greater, because many times those early workers that we worked with were there for what's kind of a short-term fix-it situation. In teaching the history of voc rehab, we often talk about the time of 4 H's. Let's see, it's hemorrhoids, hysterectomies, hearing aids, and hernias. And these were situations that many times affected a worker. They could not work, and if you've ever had one of those 4 conditions, you know that it's not very easy to work. So we would go in and pay for an operation to fix one of those situations, and the person, lickety-split, would go back to work. Not only that, but in addition to those maybe easy to serve people, we developed an expertise across the United States, particularly in the 7 or 8 states that have comprehensive rehabilitation centers like we do in Virginia, WWRC, where we had a real niche of expertise for dealing with people with spinal cord injuries like myself, cerebral palsy, amputations. These were types of disabilities that affected a person's physical capacity, presented barriers, movement predominantly. And if you need to, or it would be wise if you thought about the stigma associated with some of these people in the 60s and 70s. We did not have the role models. Now, I was thinking about what I was going to say earlier, and thinking about in my own experiences as an individual in a rehab center, and I started work there after I graduated from college in the early 70s, and seeing that people who came to the center would not necessarily come to the center now. I remember people coming to the center because of an amputation and going through an extensive period of rehabilitation, learning how to use their new prosthesis, their leg, for instance, or their arm, and then having to learn some other types of things because they were not typical to go to a business college or go to a college. They would really need to be educated on our center. And now, if you fast forward and are unfortunately dealing with losing a leg, for instance, one of the main things that you think about is your new prosthesis going to help you jump higher or run faster? We've got an enormous array of role models that are athletes that run in the Olympics and do all kinds of amazing things on prosthesis. And I just say that to be a little silly, but to just demonstrate the societal opinion of people with disabilities from the 60s and 70s to now. Vastly, vastly different. And it took a great deal of expertise in those early days to develop the science that we now take for benefit. Also, these centers were the go-to place. I live in Richmond, Virginia. We're here in Richmond, Virginia. And in 1965 or 6 or 7, after I sustained an injury, there was not very much service capacity in this area for me to learn what I needed to learn through occupational physical therapy. And the center had all of that. But due to some changes in society, and moreover some changes in government funding for insurances, Medicaid, which determines rates in a lot of situations, the insurance industry, and oversight, which looked at DRGs, disability-related groups, certificates of public need, an array of bureaucratic measures were placed on hospitals and treatment centers and rehabilitation centers. And one of the few opportunities to really generate profit was in physical medicine and rehabilitation. So right now, within probably 10 miles of the spot we're in this very minute, you've got 5 or 10 rehabilitation centers, usually in a healthcare system, a hospital, that do a lot of what our agency through our comprehensive centers used to do in the 60s and 70s. And you do not have the situation wherein a person that has a physical disability gets automatically routed to a voc rehab office. And we have lost that kind of default. And, now what we see is opposed to 10,000 successes in the 70s based on a lot of physical restoration for physical disabilities, we now are dealing more with individuals with non-physical disabilities. I took a quick glimpse at the data that our agency has from last year, and we served about 30,000 individuals in the Commonwealth of Virginia, providing them vocational rehabilitation services, which I'll be talking about later, what those services actually can be. But only a quarter of them, 27%, had what we would refer to as a physical disability, like a cord injury, cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, perhaps multiple sclerosis, where there's a physical orientation. And that is complicated or further pushed along by some federal legislation, which is really pivotal, that talks about serving people with the most significant disabilities. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 changed the whole mindset around vocational rehabilitation and started saying, this is a system that is to be provided to the consumer, the client, and the system is supposed to sit back and try to respond to the needs of the client and work collaboratively, collegially with the client. Heretofore, before that time, the client's opinion as to what they wanted to do was not very much respected. Fortunately, the Rehab Act of 1973 said, no, Voc Rehab system. This is to respond to the individual's needs, and you need to factor their desires, their abilities, their talents into how all of this works, which was a very, very good move. But that too is shifted and then complicated the services to people with physical disabilities even more. Was in the 80s, we started through congressional directives and federal guidances to work more with youngsters making a transition from school to work. And special education law began to intersect with individuals that came to us, many times with learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder, perhaps some mental illness, some learning problems, and recently a huge spike in persons with autism. And you just did not see that default that people with physical disabilities had to get into the Voc Rehab system. And I'm here to underscore now to those listening the importance that this system can have to people with physical disabilities. Still, even though we have lost our orientation that made it so easy to pay for a back surgery in the 50s and 60s, we've lost that orientation. We've gone into people in the classroom, and historically we've missed in some cases that direct alignment with people with physical disabilities, but nonetheless, the system is still there and can be responsive. So this shift from serving people with physical disabilities to serving people with intellectual disabilities, for lack of a better term, has occurred. And now we are seeing individuals like that. But again, our system is one that is responsive to the people that come to us and ask about and demand the services that they need in order to go to work. I would like to underscore a couple things about the system, in that many youngsters come to us from an education system wherein there is an entitlement to certain services through education. Our program is not entitlement driven. Excuse me while I check my notes. Is not entitlement driven, but it is really one of eligibility. And we need to make sure that certain types of eligibility standards are met. and they quite well apply towards an individual with a physical disability. Let me underscore those, and I wish I had a PowerPoint, but I don't. To be eligible for vocational rehabilitation services, 1, you must be a U.S. citizen or have documentation showing that you're eligible to work in the United States. You must have a physical or mental disability that's documented by a qualified professional. This physical or mental impairment results in a substantial impediment to employment. It's a real barrier. It's not something that can be fixed readily with a simple service like a bus ticket to get you to and from work. It's got to have some substantive impacts. And we presume that almost anybody can be employed. This is vastly different than pre-1970s, when many times we rejected people, we, the rehab professional, rejected people from services because we didn't see them being able to fit into the job market. And we have learned since that time that many, many, many individuals can readily be very successful despite the degree of their disabling condition in the workforce. To receive services in Virginia, you must be living or working in Virginia, and the counselor must be able to identify that the services that they will provide are actually going to help you go to work. I've really enjoyed being a rehabilitation counselor and being involved in rehabilitation for the many years that I have, because there's a significant amount of latitude. The voc rehab client and the voc rehab counselor can work together. It's critical that they develop an individualized plan for employment, an IPE, not to be confused with an IEP, individualized education plan, but an IPE, plan for employment. And we can set out together a clear state of goals and objectives that we can work together on. But sometimes we, as a rehabilitation individual, professional, lose sight of our main goal, and many times clients aren't aware of our primary goal, which is helping an individual go to work. When I started my tenure in 2002 with the agency that I work at now, there was a joke going around that many times we would run into a client, and when we said, why are you coming to us for services, they'd say, well, I want some stuff. And it was like the Department of Rehab stuff, which didn't really jive. But they had heard that their cousin or neighbor had gotten a vehicle or had gotten a home fixed or had gotten a quarter of fees at tuition at a community college. So by golly, they wanted their stuff too. So they came in, knocked on the door, said, hello, I want some of that stuff. And for a while, when I came on board, many of our counselors were very appropriate in helping them get some stuff. And one of the first jobs I had to do with this agency was underscore that we weren't here necessarily just to buy folks stuff, but we're here to buy them stuff that would help them go to work. There was always that very clear nexus to, if I do this, that will help an individual go to work. And we really had a rough time reorienting our staff and reorienting our clients to that very, very basic assumption that our services are to help people go to work. Many other programs help people do grand and glorious things, and that's really slick. We applaud those services. But what differentiates our staff from other people and other staffs that have case managers or social workers is our staff, the 200 or so professional counselors that we have around the Commonwealth, not only know case management, not only know medical conditions, not only know counseling skills and psychological adjustment to disability and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on, but they also understand what it takes to work, and more importantly, what it takes to work in their communities. More and more of our counselors are very well plugged in to who's hiring, what types of skills are hot in the community now, what types of industries are coming to the community, and what types of people are they looking for. And we can then provide the individual an idea of where their skills might better fit in, or what skills they might want to garner to look at a career path down the road to help them fit in based on their own knowledge, skills, and abilities, but where they can find the best fit within their community. And that really is something that I think is very, very critical to the discussion about how you might work with an individual with a physical disability. And we also not only have an eligibility criteria, but we also have issues around financial participation. I don't think it would be embarrassing too much to admit that many times we are perceived by those we serve as being cheap. And we do have the ethical dilemma every day, every half hour, every minute of the day as to how to take the dollars that we get from the federal and state governments and manage them to provide a quality rehabilitation experience to the maximum number of people. And therein is a huge debate as to where we fall in providing services. And again, I suspect that you might hear, if you talk to somebody that has gone through our system, that, well, yeah, maybe we are cheap, but we're trying to look at the combined good for an individual plus the other individuals that we have. And again, if you think about, we've got about 200 counselors around the state, and we served about 30,000 people last year. So if you do the simple math, I think that's about 150 people on each caseload that one of our counselors is responsible for, and that's a tough dynamic to try to balance the things that they need for that primary individual. And that individual rightfully doesn't give a hoot about the other 149 people. They care about themselves, and they should. But it is an ethical situation that we deal with almost all the time in ferreting out what we try to do for everyone. And that makes us very attentive to financial standards. We look to how much funding you might be able to contribute. If you're a youngster, we look at how much your parents might be able to contribute. And we also look at grants. If we're ever talking about sending somebody to college, we are very good at looking at grants, Pell Grants that can offset some of the tuition, looking at scholarships that might be able to provide some assistance, looking with those other comparable benefits that might be able to offset some of the costs, again, trying to get a quality rehabilitation experience for the very, very large number of individuals that look to us. So it's a difficult job, and again, you might think that we tend to be cheap, but we're looking at the overall good in addition to the good that we might provide to the individual. We also have an array of services, and people with physical disabilities just need to find out where our services are. The basic model works very simply. An individual can go to a website. In Virginia, you can Google the Virginia Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services, and fairly quickly, in an accessible format, be able to find an office next to them and call that office or go to that office and say, hello, my name is Jim Rothrock. I'm here to learn more about vocational rehabilitation. On our website, and I suspect most websites around the United States of vocational rehabilitation programs, most of the agencies will have some helpful hints as to some things that you can put together. vocational information, medical information if you've got a physical disability, updated and current information so that you can demonstrate the situation, the barriers that you need assistance to overcome, putting that package together, scheduling a time to meet with your counselor, and going over what your goals are. And I strongly encourage you to do that pre-thinking. Too often we have clients coming in looking for stuff or looking for help and not really have started the process by which they say, you know, what do I want to do with my life? What type of work do I want to do? So it's important for the individual to begin to have that discussion with themselves. Parenthetically, due to the Workforce Innovation Opportunities Act, which is a congressional bill, we're doing more and more in the Commonwealth and across the nation with getting to youngsters with both intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities, and mental disabilities to try to begin this exploration process at maybe 13, 14, 15 years old, as opposed to waiting to when they're leaving high school at 18, 19, 20, and beginning that discussion then, because the more that one can think about the type of work that they would like to do, the better off they're going to be. So try to have as much of that going on in your mind. But go to the office, establish a relationship, let them know that you do have a disabling condition, that you hopefully have some medical information that will explain it, or have a doctor that could readily provide that information, because we will need to see that. And then begin to do the really critical piece, is working with your counselor to develop a individualized plan for employment. Again, they will typically have long and short-term goals. They'll assign different services that will be provided, and be able to really do a roadmap, be it for 6 months or 6 years, to see where you want to go and what you're going to need to get the job that you think you have a good fit for. And then it's our job to look up how we can pay for that in the most effective way. Now, I would give you a hint. Anytime you're dealing with a person that deals with you and 149 other people, the tendency for you to get fall through a crack, get on the bottom of the phone call return list is high. And there's also an aversion that everybody has about being nagged. So if I were you, I would work with that counselor to let them clearly understand what you will be doing between our next visit, be it reading the newspaper, the want ads, talking to family members about types of jobs that family members do, going and learning about different vocations in your community, reading a book. What Color is Your Parachute is just one book it's probably old by now, but it talks about how to think vocational and be able to do that. And I would routinely check in with the counselor to just remind them, not on a day-to-day basis, but on a couple week basis, just to remind them that you have done what you said you were going to do, and you wonder how they're coming along with what they have said they need to do. Again, we are forced to deal with too many people because the demand on our services continues to escalate over time. But the gentle prompts that you could make as a good consumer will allow this program to work along. Now, what can we do for an individual with a physical disability? Again, if you are a person with a physical disability, a spinal cord injury, cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, an amputation of some sort, an anomaly, a birth anomaly, All of these types of things that might cause some type of physical deficits. What can we do? Well, let me tell you, we have a history and our clients are trained on a wide array of skills. One of the things that we have grown a capacity for is seeing how assistive technology might be able to assist you. This iPad is something that I rely on in the job that I do. And many times we are aware of different applications and different pieces of technology that allow people that don't necessarily have the dexterity to type to get the value out of the iPad through eye gazing, voice command. I mean, gosh, it used to be that was a difficult process, and now you can buy it at your app store. So again, using these technologies to open up opportunities for you is something that we can do. We can provide in some cases, if training is necessary, and I underscore if, we can provide tuition. Again, always looking at trying to get different grants and scholarships, but that's a legitimate service. One of the things that our agency can do, and as a wheelchair user, I benefit from, is I personally think that anybody that uses a wheelchair needs a good backup. Yet many times it's kind of hard to drop another couple $1,000 for a new wheelchair. Many times vocational rehabilitation agencies like mine have relationships with durable medical equipment recycling outfits. In Virginia, we have a thing called FREE, the Foundation for Rehabilitation Equipment Endowment. And our Virginia Assistive Technology System works with them and other providers to be able to identify a piece of equipment that you can have on a back burner just in case your chair or your walker or your crutches or whatever breaks down, you've got a backup. So this is something that we typically have an opportunity to work through. VCU in the late 70s, early 80s, I hope, started a concept called job coaching. And much of what we do at the Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services in Virginia is to provide job coaching. Many times that's individuals that need on the spot coaching as to how to complete a task. But we have found that in some cases that can be of benefit to somebody with a physical disability also. So job coaching is an area of expertise that we can default to. Job clubs. Getting together, well, one of the key things about getting a job, and again, remember that everything I'm talking about is reflected not to get on to some more stuff, but to get a job. But job clubs, where you're getting out, you're seeing what other people are doing, you're learning about job openings. These types of things are really, really critical in finding success. And many times, voc rehab offices across the United States offer the opportunity through our one-stop partners that are defined by federal government, and I'm not going to get into that. But again, we've got really several venues where you can get into a job club. And not only are you getting information about a job lead, but you're providing support to someone else who's looking for a job. Equipment. In Virginia, we do not buy automobiles, but we buy the adaptive equipment that makes an automobile accessible, be it a hand control, a device that makes steering more easy, or like myself, in some cases, you have vehicles that are modified that have the ramps coming out of the body of the car. We've got one wonderful client that learned how to drive with his feet because he was born without arms, and he came to our center looking for perhaps some really expensive equipment. But after we really looked down to it, looked at his talents, looked at our experience, we're able to find some very easy and low cost modifications that allowed him to drive. Home modifications. Often we can go in and help a person live more comfortably, allowing them to be more successful in work. Again, the nexus towards work, by making their home more accessible and livable. And lastly, we are much more improved just over the last 4 years in identifying jobs that businesses need and then allowing our agency to be kind of a staffing company or to train people on what skills are needed. We've had some wonderful success in logistics and movement of goods with Hershey, the sweetest job in town, Hershey Chocolates. We have got a wonderful program going on in outside of Richmond with Amazon, people helping move goods from point A to point B to get to your home. CVS, the drug retailer, we have actually been able to develop an opportunity for many people with an array of disabling conditions to learn what it's like to work into a CVS. We give them an internship and then plug them in to a job that they want, and we're finding that these individuals are being very successful. And being able to be aware of what labor trends are and then provide you, the client, with an opportunity to see what everybody needs is real critical. Now, we don't shove everybody into CVS. I recently got a success report of a young man with a birth defect. I'm sorry, I'm using that outdated terminology, but he had significant contractures of his body, relied on a wheelchair for mobility, and we were able to provide him tuition such that he is now a physicist and is making about 60 grand with full benefits a year. The gentleman without arms that I mentioned earlier is making a career out of it. He's a musician. We have got people in technology fixing computers and using computers. We've got social workers. Again, we've got a wide array of jobs that we typically help people enter, but we're also plugged into what job needs are and are trying to make sure that we fulfill those. So I would just encourage you, if you've got a physical disability, to learn more about what your vocational rehabilitation program can do for you in Oklahoma, Arizona, California, Vermont, or Florida, or Virginia. They all have programs. They all are similarly fashioned based on federal guidance around eligibility and processes. They all do an individualized plan for employment, and they all can offer you an opportunity to identify your skills and abilities, learn more about what you can be to be more prepared if necessary, and plug you into the workforce in your area such that you can have a quality rehabilitation experience that leads to not just a job, but hopefully a career. It has been a real pleasure talking to you today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope most of you have stayed awake. And if not, hit your neighbor and get them to share some of the information that they hopefully have picked up. And again, please learn about what a vocational rehabilitation program can do for you. Thank you and good luck.